In this bonus edition of Hoopsology, we welcome the host of the sports media podcast, Richard Deitsch. Richard provides his insight on the state of sports viewership during 2020. He also gives his opinions on how ESPN and TNT handle social justice and more. And now, Richard Deitsch is the host of the sports media podcast and writer for the online publication The Athletic. We welcome Richard Deitsch onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Richard?
Good to be here, guys.
Full disclosure, Richard, I've been a huge fan of your podcast ever since I discovered it when you did the Paul Heyman interview, and been listening ever since. I think you do incredible work, and I just want to say that up front. I think what you bring to the sports community is a true value to any sports fan, so I truly appreciate your podcast.
Well, now I question your opinion now, Justin. Although I appreciate that all. It's very nice of you, honestly, to say thank you.
So let's get into this interview, and we wanted to have you on because my co-host, who is not here, we talk about ratings all the time, and particularly the NBA, and we just want to get your perspective first on 2020. This has been a year unlike any other, and within the sports, it's been probably the most viewed media genre compared to others. So I just wanted to ask you, in terms of how ratings played out through, what you saw through the whole sports landscape, what did you think? Did it play out the way you were thinking in terms of once the pandemic hit, you would see more eyeballs on live sports, or maybe not? What were your opinions on that?
Well, if I go back to, let's go back to sort of mid-March or April. My probably initial, again, we're in a whole different world in December, so it's even hard to sort of think about how any of us were thinking about anything in March. But I think my initial thought would have been at some point during the pandemic that viewership in certain things would have been way up, particularly like jewel events. That would have been, if I'm going to be honest, my initial thought. People are stuck at home. People have to work at home, and they're going to be, they're going to need more entertainment choices because things like going to the movies or in some cases going outside won't exist. So I am sure that my initial thought was like some of these viewership numbers are going to go up. Obviously, we all know that turned out not to be the case. The reality is that the sports calendar changed, and that's first and foremost, that sort of changed everything. The fact that events were not sporting events were not happening when you normally were used to a particular sport happening had a significant impact on just viewer behavior and viewer habits. So like if you didn't, like the Kentucky Derby is the first week in May. Like we sort of just know that as sports fans. And if that changes, well, I think the reality is like more people than not, like probably aren't going to necessarily follow like when it changes. You have to be kind of a diehard fan of the sports to sort of know everything. So that's first and foremost. The sports calendar changed. Secondly, of course, sports calendar changing means more competition in those windows. So as we saw very early on in the pandemic, different sports going up against each other at untraditional times. So there can only be so many eyeballs for certain things, and that had an impact. 2020, of course, was an election year. That was a massive factor in all this. If you look at cable news, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all their numbers were dramatically up, and viewership has to come from somewhere. And I think, again, there were probably some casual sports fans who made decisions that they were watching election coverage, news coverage, as opposed to sports. And then finally, this is probably one that I didn't recognize early enough, but I certainly do now. The pandemic just changed people's lives dramatically in that television, in particular, watching just wasn't as paramount anymore. You got to take care of your family. You got to figure out how you're going to pay your bills. In certain cases, you got a lot of family at home. So you as a sports fan might not have your television at that time. It might have to go to somebody else in your family. And that ended up changing, I think, the viewership numbers as well. So that sort of gives you like at least a writ large look as to like what happened. There are probably other small factors too, but you combine all of those different things, and that's where you get some declines. The best story that's out there probably in terms of viewership is the NFL, which is down single digits, which really in this environment is just incredible, and it shows you the power of the NFL.
And to your second point, in terms of the changing sports calendar, in terms of NBA ratings in particularly, do you think that was a contributing factor as to why there was a decline there? Just my co-host, we always debate, like, is politics really a factor or not? I'm usually on the side, not really. There's other like factors contributing to it, not to mention the NBA is more of a, I think, evolving sport in terms of their reach on YouTube, social media, etc. A lot of these younger fan bases not necessarily just watching the games outright. They're wait till the highlights come out after the conclusion of the event. So do you contribute in particularly the NBA's kind of rating struggles to that changing landscape of the sports calendar, or do you think there might be other things involved there?
Well, yeah, the answer to all these questions, if you're going to be honest, is like it's always a number of factors. There's never a singular reason as to why television viewership in particular is either up or down. It's always multiple factors. Could there be like a singular factor that's more important? Yeah, of course, for sure. But it's never one thing. And the country's too big. There are too many variables across the country. If you're, in terms of sort of my perspective on the NBA, why things were down, I think there's a number of factors. One, the season stopped, and it stopped all momentum from March to until they restarted. That's not good for any of these leagues, whether it's the NHL or the NBA. You're getting no momentum play in terms of trying to get viewership. Not that the viewership of the NBA was so great before that, but that really hurts. That's a significant one. Second, when they came back, they did run into a crowded sports calendar. So in that case, they were dealing with some increased competition. Third, I think that this year in particular in the NBA, one of their issues, and this has now been an issue now for 2 years, is that the West was far and away the most how do I sort of say, the West had the most attractive teams in their landscape in terms of viewership. And what that meant is that whether it's LeBron or the Clippers, and obviously before this, Golden State was the league standard bearer along with wherever LeBron was, viewership in that first window, that 7 o'clock window or that 8 o'clock window for the NBA, really has lagged since LeBron left the East. And so in order you don't have your biggest stars, your best matchups in that early window. You have it in the late window. And that's not very good for viewership, because the reality is people on the East Coast are, by and large, casual sports fans, not staying up till 10:30 to watch a regular season or perhaps even an early postseason basketball game. So the league would really be helped by the fact if you can get one of these Eastern teams to be, to really be a draw. That's why Brooklyn, I think, is a great hope for the league. If they're good, Kevin Durant is a star, draws attention. That would be really, really helpful for the league. Golden State returning too would be helpful. Golden State was the best viewership team during their run, and then last year they tanked. So you got nothing from Golden State. You got nothing from New York and Chicago, two of the three biggest markets in the country. Zion Williamson was out, so you got nothing from Zion, where you hope that he would have been significant viewership. So those are all the game factors. And then fourth, finally, yeah, absolutely, there probably were some people who didn't want to watch the NBA because of I'm not talking about hardcore fans, but there were some people probably turned off by their social justice messaging and didn't want any kind of politics in sports. But I don't, in my opinion, and in the opinion of people who write about this stuff and research this stuff and do this stuff, like sports viewership experts, people who research this to sell broadcast time to advertisers, they don't believe that any kind of politics or social justice messaging were significant factors in NBA viewership being down. Was it a factor? Yeah, probably. But that's where it gets into like how much of a factor. My argument would be this: for those who say that like politics are the reason the NBA is down, well, explain to me why the Stanley Cup Finals were down 61%. Explain to me why the Kentucky Derby was down 50%. Explain to me why the U.S. Open final round of golf was down, whatever it was, 40, 50%. Explain to me why the Sunday of the Masters was the worst, least watched round of the Masters in history. I can do chapter and verse in this. I can give you a million of these kind of examples. So the NBA is an easy pinata to hit on. There's larger sort of larger sociological issues as to why that's the case, why the NBA is an easy one for people to pick on. But politics, in my opinion, were not the major reason the viewership was down. I think it's a combination of multiple factors, and you then have to, I think, do a little bit of a guessing game in terms of why those factors exist. I will say this though, and I'm a huge NBA fan. They do have some issues. They really do got to figure out who the next television stars are post LeBron. It's not that there's not stars in the league. There's great players in the league. We all love Giannis, and we all love Bam Adebayo, and where I live in Toronto, love Pascal, etc. But it's one thing for the players to be great, and another thing for there to be star attractions that a casual sports fan wants to tune into, the way they did with Jordan, LeBron. And that's the NBA's challenge: is can they find those types of either transcendent stars or those types of transcendent teams to get your casual fans involved in the game, because that's how you get better viewership.
To that point, with Kyrie Irving briefly saying he wasn't going to talk to the media, and then he kind of broke that.
Sure.
And Durant kind of hopping on that bandwagon too. How important is it for really the athletes to actually speak to the media after the game? I mean, in terms of their actual contract obligations, I mean, I think they're contracted to, but just in terms of like younger fans, I mean, they're usually tuning into them via podcasts that they control their own message, or through their own social media. So for a player like Kyrie or Kevin Durant, or even future players entering the league, do you see kind of the post-game press conference really going away? Because a lot of these athletes they can just control their message on their own. There's a mistrust between the athlete and the media. If they can just control the narrative themselves, why even go through the trouble of talking to a reporter?
Well, no, it's not going to go away, because the league mandates
Sure.
league mandates players talking to the press, which is smart. If the NBA and all these leagues, you want media attention, you want interest in your game, and the media more than not. And I hate saying media because it's a nonsense catch-all term. There is no capital M media, because a high school football reporter in Colorado has nothing in common with Jake Tapper or CNN.
Sure.
So let's just say, for just to be specific here, specificity, say NBA media. So no, I don't think players are going to shut out NBA media because Kyrie Irving thinks NBA media at the moment are pawns, or Kevin Durant doesn't want to talk to them. No doubt, though, that the players have obviously their own avenues now to talk to the public. They have massive Instagram feeds. They have massive Twitter feeds. Guys like LeBron have their own production company, and Durant. So yeah, it's not about like, do they have the means to talk to the public? They do, and they'll continue to have it. It's, does the league that they work for still believe that there should be kind of access for media who cover the game, and the league still believes that, which I think obviously is the smart play. I think it would be almost professional suicide to somehow ban sports media from any of these sports. It's you'd be surprised, I think, at what it might do for your game. I don't think any game is so strong that they can afford to like not have people covering them on a daily basis outside of their media rights holders. But you are correct in that, like, there's inevitably going to be a tension between certain players and certain media members. I think I understand where the players come from, that it's a lot to talk every day, and I totally respect that. And there's a lot of access. The hope is that both sides can find some kind of medium where everybody can be a professional. For me, I've always sort of approached it as like, if I'm covering a beat and an athlete doesn't want to talk that day, I totally respect it. As long as we can have a relationship where, we're sort of treating each other as adults, and me as the reporter, I'm sort of always fair and accurate. and the athlete sort of, on the reverse is professional and fulfills responsibilities and requirements that they've agreed to based on their collective bargaining. I think it can work. The thing about the NBA, interestingly enough, is I think actually the players have, by and large, like phenomenal relationships with their media, perhaps compared to some other sports. Like I think the NBA guys they're incredible when it comes to media. They're very revealing. They're interesting. They're willing to talk. I mean, you have some of the best guys in the league, uh, global stars like Steph Curry, who are incredibly media friendly. So I think if you talk to NBA reporters, I actually think they have it much better, perhaps, than like baseball reporters who have to be there every day, 162 games. That's when it really, like, the relationship can get a little tense because you're always in their face. So yeah, I mean, to me, I think Kyrie is an outlier, and I think he's always been one. And if Durant follows suit, he's going to be an outlier too. But trust me, it doesn't mean like Karis LeVert and Steve Nash and Spencer Dinwiddie, those guys, you know what I mean? Like the Nets aren't going to
Sure.
shut down. Like the whole team's not shutting down. That's insane.
Yeah.
What is a reality though with the pandemic though is that all the stuff is being done by Zoom, so it does give the league far better controls over access. That's if I was a reporter, if I was a publication, that's what I'd be a little more worried about is, what happens if they try to continue this post pandemic, which they might, where it's they close locker rooms or something like that, and they just make everything Zoom or everything virtual. That's where it gets, a little worrisome, because your best stories always come from face-to-face contact, as opposed to, you get one or two questions in like an open press conference on Zoom.
Yeah, I guess that was my point. I apologize. I wasn't specific enough. I guess I meant, like you were saying, like that locker room coverage, like in terms of the athlete, they get the interview after the game and then they have the post-game press conference, but that locker room is closed off. That might be a changing dynamic, like you mentioned, because of the pandemic and the Zoom press conferences now. I want to ask you on that point, specifically to reporters and commentators, what have you seen in terms of interviewing them, the challenges they face in terms of calling games, of just, for instance, Malika Andrews being in a bubble? I know along with her and Chris Hayes, they were gone for a long time from their families. Just being in that isolation that had to just take a toll on them, even though they're busy covering the NBA constantly. What have been your experiences interviewing kind of these media journalists and personalities, just covering these different sports? Has it been more of a challenge? Is it taxing on them, or is it kind of business as usual?
No, I mean, I think it's been tough, at least in the bubble. You're away from your family, you're away from what you know. You do have the comfort of mind that you're safe in terms of testing, but everything else is just so abnormal. You feel removed from the rest of society. If keep in mind, just think about the timing that they were in the bubble with, what happened with Jacob Blake or George Floyd. Like I'm sure a lot of these players and certainly the reporters just felt helpless. Like they felt like they had, they were sort of not necessarily stuck, but they were just sort of in this bubble where they couldn't necessarily be part of what was going on outside of them. The access was great, they said, in terms of just being able to get access to the players. There weren't a ton of reporters, so you're not really, your competition is far less. You're not competing against as many people. So the kind of stories that you can get from inside the bubble obviously are pretty exceptional. So I think it was a combination. I think they were, I think in basketball terms, it was probably an amazing experience. You'll never probably get that close to the court or the players, but in sort of human societal terms, I think they experienced some of the same things that the players experienced. Depression at times and the mental health challenges at times, just because you're in your little room, you're locked away, you're in this sort of hermetically sealed bubble, while the whole world is sort of on fire outside of you. So I think they probably experienced, I would think, very similar emotions to the players.
And overall, in terms of the viewing experience for the fan, what are your just general thoughts of how the league's I guess, adapted to just this new paradigm. And particularly with the NBA, we saw that the video screens, I know WWE has done the video screens as well. We saw Major League Baseball with just papered fans. It's kind of gone all over the map in terms of how they wanted to um, adapt the fan experience, just with how the viewers are seeing it on TV. What were your thoughts? Which things you saw that worked? What were things that you saw that didn't work? And what do you think, for instance, with the NBA coming up, they can kind of put in place to make the viewing experience enjoyable?
Listen. I think what they created was incredible, given like what they were working with. I mean, they were at these Disney World courts that had never been used, obviously, for like consecutive NBA games, and they were able to create some kind of environment that was just very interesting television wise. So the look was very cool. The broadcasters like were able to, at least the ones who were on site, they figured out ways to make that work, putting the broadcasters where they were, 10 rows up, um, and so at least you get you sort of felt a little bit of a game experience. They piped in noise on the court, and that, while again not a perfect sort of replacement for the crowd, I thought that was kind of cool. Cameras seemed to be able to take us into places where we wanted to go. So I thought they did actually. I thought the operations team for the NBA and for the networks they did an incredible job. To me, that was just remarkable. The challenges this year, of course, are just like you're going to be in arenas, but you're not going to be in any kind of sold out arenas. You're going to have 3,000 people. So the challenge, of course, first and foremost, is safety. Can you keep people safe? Can you keep them protected inside these arenas? And then secondly, sort of how's it going to look? I think very clearly ESPN and Turner are going to do some of the games on site, but during the regular season, but far more remotely, far more from either Bristol headquarters or the homes of their broadcasters. So that's going to be a challenge for the broadcasters. Is they're going to have to create some kind of excitement artificially, some kind of excitement where they're not at the court, but they're looking at all this stuff on video screens. That's a challenge. So for these networks, the challenge really is technologically. The biggest challenge is to make it technologically sound and make it technologically working, so that you as a viewer just sort of feel like, yeah, it's not exactly like it used to be, but it's as close as we could expect during a pandemic. And then, knock on wood, if these vaccines work and the world gets into a better place, their challenge is going to be like, can we shift into a more normal environment in May and in June? So the television networks that air NBA games have a lot of challenges this year, but first and foremost, their challenges are technology related.
And just relating to the bubble itself, earlier we were just discussing politics, and in my opinion, the way that the NBA addressed a lot of these social justice issues was really fantastic, going into really deep discussions. Really, both networks. TNT's always been great at that. ESPN not so much, but I thought ESPN took some real valuable steps in that direction. Just acknowledging what was going on in the country at that time. Moving forward, in terms of the NBA, in terms of, now the league not featuring Black Lives Matter on the court, the discussion of how players can contribute to social justice issues has died down now. The election is over. Do you see this discussion kind of going away? How does basically, I wanted to ask you, how do you think the league should move forward and always kind of addressing these issues, even if there's not a hot news topic or some kind of shooting going on? How can they keep their foot on the pulse of what's happening in the country without just always reacting to just a news cycle?
Well, I think first and foremost that that's going to be up to the players. I hope the players continue to decide to use their forum after and before games to speak out on whatever they wish to speak out. You are correct. The league is obviously gonna they're gonna dial back the on-court messaging of this stuff for sure. Should they not? They're making a business decision at the end of the day to roll back, and I think the players seem to be accepting of some less visuals on that. But I think the players have the leverage and the power where if this is something that they want to talk about, the league is going to support them when they're when they're talking about this stuff publicly. So I would still expect the players in the league to speak out when they see, or when the moment calls for them to talk about institutional racism or things like that. I think they're going to speak out. I think the press and the NBA media will certainly listen and reflect and cover that stuff, because it's important to the players, and if it's important to the players, it's sort of ultimately going to be important to the media that covers them day to day. Yeah, will we see NBA players get asked about China? Well, NBA's response to China was shit to me, so I think those are fair questions. But I'm not sure we're going to get into that this year. I think the NBA obviously wants to try to stay away from that issue as much as possible, given it was a hotbed issue for them in the wrong way. So yeah, I mean, I think we will see a reduction of what was in the bubble, because what was in the bubble. One of the conditions that the players agreed to play was that this stuff, particularly the messaging on the court, would be there. And we're not going to see that as much this year as much as we saw that in the bubble. That said, I do think that I hope I'm right about this. I think the league understands how important it is to their constituency, which is a mostly African-American constituency. And these are young Black men who have things to say about what is going on in this country with people of color. And I think the league, I believe this, I think the league has their back when it comes to that. Whether ESPN or Turner does, we'll see. Turner, like you said, has always been good with this stuff, especially inside the NBA. They never run away from politics, quite frankly. And some of their greatest shows ever have nothing to do with basketball and have to do with what's going on in society. ESPN, you're right. They should get credit for sort of embracing what was going on in the country and getting rid of their sort of stick to sports mantra. I'm not so convinced that they're. I think they want to toe the line a lot more. I think having covered ESPN for a long time, they're much more reactive than proactive on this stuff, and they get a little bit afraid, thinking that they're going to get bad press, or not bad press. That's not the right thing. I think they get a little bit afraid that some bad faith brokers out there are going to really hammer them. And sometimes they don't have the courage of their own convictions to just not worry about what bad faith actors have to say. So we'll see. We'll see on the ESPN part. But, I mean, anybody who reads me or follows me on Twitter knows that, I think sports and politics are inherently intertwined. Close your eyes to this stuff just as being naive and foolish. It goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. You have massive examples of this in sports all the time, from Jesse Owens in Berlin to Smith and Carlos in '68 to Colin Kaepernick in modern day. You're fooling yourself if you don't think sports are political. I mean, literally as I'm taping and talking to you on this, the Russians are now, it looks like, being allowed back in the Olympics after state-sponsored doping. It's all political in some sense. So yeah, it's good question that you asked, and we'll see. I mean, the short answer is we'll see how the NBA treats this stuff as we head into the season.
And one more question before I let you go. And again, I really appreciate the time. I wanted to sneak in a WNBA question, because I thought they gained a lot of traction in the pandemic. And what I've seen on social media is actually a lot of attention of high school women's high school players just having their own social media following. And what comes to mind is Paige Buckers. Now she's playing for UConn. And I see a shift in terms of just natural media attention. Do you see that molding into more attention on the WNBA as a league? Because I think this was really the first year that you saw the WNBA get attention, not only for the social justice message, but just the athleticism and just athletes on the court.
It's getting better. I'm not as optimistic that somehow like all these different places are going to cover it. They should, of course. I mean. Sure. When I was at Sports Illustrated, I covered women's basketball for 15 plus years, and really tried hard to write about it when I wasn't writing media stuff, because I really like the sport and admire the athletes. So it's better. We're in a better place. I think more places than ever have covered the WNBA. But we'll see. I guess is sort of how I always sort of put it out there. It's college basketball as a whole. I think sort of has less coverage this year because of the pandemic, and it's a sport that's sort of, at least so far, just it's sort of getting a little bit lost, at least at this point of the season, because of everything else that's going on. But the undoubtedly, as the women's basketball athlete gets better, we should see more coverage, and we hopefully will see more crossover of casual sports fans sort of knowing some of these players' names. But it's still, generally speaking, sort of, at least on the broadcast side, it's still ESPN sort of far and away the leaders here. And for instance, they cut one of their women's basketball writers not too long ago in the layoffs. So I don't know. There's still a lot of newspapers around the country that don't have a WNBA writer in their city covering games, covering every game. So I'm hopeful, but I still remain a little skeptical. But I'm with you. I mean, I think it's a great sport. I watched or covered most of these players when they were in college, and it's amazing to see like the longevity of somebody like Sue Bird or Candace Parker, and then some of the newer players like Jewel Lloyd or Breanna Stewart, just how they've gone on to go from college stars to pro stars. The athleticism in the league is off the charts. I think people are, if they happen to catch clips of Fran Belby at Stanford dunking, I think, people, those who are surprised shouldn't be surprised. I mean, the athleticism of this sport has just grown a lot over the last couple of years. So I'm hopeful. I'm just a little skeptical. I'm not ready to sort of say we've arrived, because there's just too many news outlets across the country that literally have a professional team in their backyard, and they have not assigned a reporter to cover it full time.
Well, Richard, we really appreciate you coming on to Hoopsology. Can you please let our listeners know where they can find your sports media podcast? I think it's a must listen for any sports fan, no matter what sport they follow.
Just type it into your Google machine, as they say, and you'll see it on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher. And yeah, anybody who wants to listen, please do. These are, this is not Joe Rogan's podcast. It's a very niche podcast, has its own little audience, but I appreciate the production company letting me do it, and I've enjoyed it. It's a forum where I can go a little bit longer, as opposed to the stuff I do for The Athletic.
Well, Richard, again, thank you very much for appearing on the show. Truly appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you for the invite.